What we will talk about, or what I will talk about, is this. Why design? And why we should invest in design. I won't give you the answer, but I will give you my view on it. And if you want to borrow or steal anything of those ideas, feel free. I will do it in 3 steps. So I will shortly introduce the studio that I've been founding, which is Form Us with Love. And then we will talk about this, why design, and then end up in actually having an example of how design could actually make a difference. And that's this project that we've been doing together with SB Seating. The studio that we started 9 years ago was actually the same day that we graduated. So no internships, any other work. So we've been more or less doing a lot of mistakes, and some 9 years later I think we know a bit more what we're doing. But the start was actually just a vision. We actually ran to the bank and said we want to start a company, and they said we can't start a company just around the vision. You need to have a budget, you need to have a business plan and so on. But we stick to this idea to really shape the leading design brands of tomorrow, which means that design is not only about creating objects, it's about going a bit deep into a company and see how we can actually change it. At that time we didn't know how to do it, but I think we figured it out during the years. When it comes to design, I think we have all different views on it. I think we all can agree that design is passion, or it's something that is enjoyable. What annoys me a lot is that when I hear companies say we're working with design, but it should also be functional. But isn't that design? That we're designing things to be working for the users. The third thing that annoys me is when people say we're working with design, but then we're also creating objects that's supposed to sell. So isn't it better to design objects that sells? So that's a major thing to change. And I can't stop repeating the example of what Apple have done. And everyone is using that example, where we see a company actually designing things that we want to buy. And we don't need to package this in a strange marketing and tell a funny story. It's just about telling the true story. We have the luxury of working with a range of different companies. One day being a very large global company, and the other day being in a small startup. I would say mainly that large companies need to think small, because large companies tend to just doing documents and reports, and then they get boring. So they need to think small, and small companies need to think big in order to grow. So I think we can actually learn a bit being in the middle of those two worlds. I also have to say that I've been part of creating 2 other companies quite recently. One is a watch company called Tid Watches, and the other one is Baux, which I will show you some slides around. This is a lighting producer in Sweden called Atelier Lyktan. They had a really strong design culture, I would say, during the 60s, exporting a lot, doing interesting things. And then they were bought by Philips, then they were bought by Fagerhult Group, and they became boring. Then they decided we need to be interesting again and export and make new things. And we got the job to position them, not only with products but also in general. This was the second product that we did, and we saw an opportunity in new behaviors. When actually Steve Jobs held this phone in his hand and said, we're going to use smartphones now, then we saw, okay, we need a lot of energy. And the design is made so you actually can grab it very easily, and you should understand it instantly. Plug and a lamp in one idea. Could be used in hotels, schools, or in your home. This was the watch brand that I just said, and I have it on my arm as well. I think the mission without this company is interesting. We want to explore time, not about time last tick tick, time, but also materials that change and how things can last. So for the leather wristbands, it's leather that could actually grow, and it's vegetable tanned leather. And now we're looking into many different materials that we can do this watch in. But it's actually the team behind it, I think, is very design driven. 4 people, 1 PR person, 1 very fashion design interested CEO, and 2 other designers. This is Muto. It's a Danish brand, very fast growing. We got a brief to rethink what industrial lamp is, and the fact that you actually can just change the material and squeeze it together and just unfold it when you received it. And that's also the name, Unfold. This material, you are familiar with it, or have you seen wood wool cement boards up in the ceiling somewhere? There's one factory in Sweden doing this material, and we were looking for sound absorbing materials to our office, and this is a very old material that's been around for maybe 100 years. And we thought it was interesting just to look into it a bit deeper. We went to the factory and we met the owner, and his office is in this material. His home is in this material. So for sure he's very passionately about the material. He also said that we can't export. And that was something that we thought was interesting, because there is another factory in Denmark, there is another factory in Norway. So we said maybe we can rethink the target group, not sell the materials for 200 kronor per square meter. Maybe we can repackage it and make it into an architect product that is more flexible and more creative. And then we just received orders without any salespeople, any marketing, and it was about adding 10% of the turnover. So then we created a team, but the fact that we have 1 supply chain expert, 1 digital person, 1 PR person, and 2 designers, and then we created Baux. And the idea with that brand is to actually find materials that is very functional and good working that we can repackage for modern architecture. Since February, we got clients like Stella McCartney, soon Google, big chains in the United States. Just in a couple of months, the factory probably doubled their production capacity thanks to this. Just as a last example, we worked closely from the start with the Finnish brand called One Nordic Furniture company, a very passionately owner, and he wanted to sell furniture online. So this was the first project, and we'd be part of the whole branding and involving other designers. And the idea here is that you should mount your chair without any instructions, without any tools. So you basically just snap the top part in, you put the 2 legs and you screw it together. And I think that's something that we talk a lot about. You can't tell everything in one product. So if we designing a new way of mounting it together, maybe we can't also make it into a new aesthetics. So have some kind of focus in each project. That's from our studio. And that's also based on new needs on the market. We have a big sound problem, as we all know if we're working with public spaces. We saw a need of combining a lighting and a sound absorber. So this is a kind of a system, also for Ateljé Lyktan, which was the first example of plug lamp, where the architects actually built their own lamps. And that together with plug lamp, it actually, according to them, positioned the brand. During 2 years, they have increased their sales with about 5 million euro. Not only selling those products, but it's opened doors to projects that they have not been interested in before. Maybe we can just give a hands up. Is there someone here is a designer? Half the crowd? Someone is buying design, or architect maybe, or architect from Scandinavian Business Seating? The rest, yeah. But when we start off, I think we start off thinking about what we should do. Is that we should design a chair, or we start off thinking like that, and then we trying to come up with the story of how we should communicate this to the crowd. Just a week ago, I was lecturing for the top management of IKEA, and I was doing this. I was saying, we start off with what? And I was like, yeah! Then we do how, and yeah! And then in the end, we come up with the idea of how we should communicate, yeah! no, we should start here. And everyone was laughing and said, but I didn't want to go to trick you that much. So what we do when we design things, we actually go out there and look into how people actually live and how they behave in their daily life. Because I think everyone can be creative. It's just like we don't learn how to be creative. There is no education in schools of how you be creative. It's basically just tools. I'm not more creative than anyone else. We're just more curious and ask more questions and go out there, see what's actually happening. And when you have found out that, you need to go to the next step and see how we should do things. And then you should place, according to me, the user in the middle. There is too much design based on personal opinions. But as a designer, we cannot forget about the user. I think it's like being a lawyer. So if you're a lawyer, you protect the subject, or we say. And that's actually what you do as a designer. So if someone in the production say, or we can start from the top, for management. As a designer, you need to understand what's the direction of a company, what's their vision, what's their mission. And if you can't answer that, maybe you should not do the design and maybe start off helping the management find the direction. Then you need to understand R&D, which is basically often where you end up as a product designer, research and development. See what kind of opportunities do we have here? What kind of team do we have? And then we have the production. And often the case, the production is saying, now we need to push the button because we need to produce this. Then as a designer you need to say, but it's not perfect. You can't sit in this chair because it's not a proper angle. We need to do another prototype. Then you need to kind of understand marketing to tell the story. Because often you spend 2 years here, 1, 2, 3 years with R&D, and then you just leave the project to some bureau trying to tell that story. But as a designer, you can be part of that as well. And then sales, that we usually don't talk so much about. Like, how do we actually sell things? And then we can be very okay in the creative process of not knowing where we'll end up. Because it's so scary to start a creative process. The main thing is to have a mission. Because people don't care about what you do, they care about why you're doing it. And you can really see the companies that are having a clear mission, then you're really appealed about why they're doing it, you want to be part of it. And then I believe in creating a design culture, and that's not the easy thing. But if you can manage to create a design culture where you have a full concept, but where all the details matters, then it became very strong. And you don't have to say to people mounting a chair in the factory that we need to use this kind of screws, because they know this. It's part of the design culture. Just 2 examples. The company to the left is Boulogne. It's the same companies that we have on the carpets we have here on the floor. We were doing their design profile or their design marketing during 5 years to position them as a brand for internationally for architects. And this is a thing that we did called Artisan, where we involved the whole company in creating a big art piece. So that was one thing, to involve people, but also to create something that actually say that we can be much more than a carpet company. To test that. So that was actually their ads in wallpaper and so on, was looking like that. The other example, which we have not been involved in, but I think is a brilliant example, that's Syntobel. And that's their annual report. And as a designer, I think an annual report is not so appealing to see figures. But if you actually design the annual report, and it's part of the Design Museum's 100 most interesting objects of last year, then you really say that our company is about design. It's not about figures. Another example is within R&D. I would say to create a design process is crucial for all companies. And I haven't met none company so far that has a really good design process. So there is a lot to do there. And as a designer, I think the main thing is to defend the rights for the user. Not creating objects, but to actually all the way through the process. And then the companies really needs, as we working with producing companies, to also let the designer be part of it and not saying, you're an annoying person, why? Just give us a sketch and then we arrange everything else. That's not really the thing. How we do it is a lot of workshops to actually work together with the people, involving people from the different areas. And I will come to one example in the end, which is probably the best example. Just one thing from production, I think it's just to go there. Many of the things that we have created is actually in the factory. You ask, what's that machine? Why is that machine not working? Or could that be done in another way? And then you can just maybe reinvent in the existing facilities. And this is just one example of what we did with a Swedish producer. They do this stretch metal, but they were doing it in a new way, which was gradient. We thought that it could be, they use it for fences, like in industrial facilities, which is a very low design market. And we said, maybe we can do something else, and that ended up as a lamp for Capellini, which is quite interesting from being a producer in Sweden. And we're selling a lamp to an Italian brand that's selling it to a customer in Dubai, maybe. So that was actually a story in New York Times, because the Swedish company is one of the oldest producers in Sweden, starting off doing horseshoes some 300 years ago. And when it comes to marketing, I think we will see a lot of change. I hope we will see a change where marketing is not about come up with a good idea in the end. It's about telling the idea that we have created in the R&D. So tell true stories. And that's what we like. Even if we buy milk or a car, we want to know what people have thought about this and why we're doing that and so on. And this is just some snapshots from our Instagram. So it's not really marketing, but it's marketing. But actually to see us building this quite ugly chair to try out how you sit in a chair, it's a value for a customer. Or that we actually use new technology with 3D printers, or we are in the factory, or we're sketching. It's not so, it's just honest, and this is how we do it. Then you understand it's also maybe cost, what it costs. And the last thing, I'm not a salesperson, but I am in one way because we all are, but Rethink Sales, I think is a pretty crucial thing. I see so many salespeople just talking about price, but it's such a difference if we start off saying we created a brief, and then we went to Singapore to explore that thing, and then we found out this was actually happening in that part of the world. Together we found this material and we produced it in this way, blah blah blah, and in the end maybe we can say, by the way, it's a share and it costs €100, but you won't really care because you have heard so many other good things before. But then you need to have those, give those tools to the salespeople to actually tell the stories. We did it in Milan, and we've done it a few times in Milan to actually involve people in a new way. This was last year, where we created a space for rest, because there is so much attention in Milan. We call it the Oasis. So during the days it was a meeting spot, but the main thing was by night we invited 24 very selected guests eating dinners. So it's not about selling, it's about meeting people, but having the L decoration editor at one seat and an architect from Switzerland together with Giulio Capellini, happened something. And as a last thing, I would just go through probably one of the best examples from a proper design process, and that's RBM Noor, which we have here. I never heard about this before. Maybe it exists, but usually when you design something, if you're using an external designer, you say to one designer to be part of the process and work on the project. As you can see to the right, we are a team. so we are used to working in a team. But in this case, they said to 3 design studios. From Norway, Stokke Åstad, from Denmark, Grandrund Design, and from Sweden, Formas with Love. Because they want to have different views on different markets. So we started off doing a research project on our market, saying what's happening on our market. Then we went here. We were locked in, more or less, in a house. All these designers. And during a week, there was some intense designing from the research that we brought into this project. And the brief was to design a canteen chair, a platform chair, that could work in many different spaces. But it should also be very recyclable, so we couldn't fuse together material, for instance. And as you can see, there is one platform, but it's very, very different chairs in one way. It's 7 different main versions that could also be combined in a lot of different aesthetics with colors and textiles and so on. When the design was made, we did an art direction thing that we actually took all the photos, which we did in Sweden. And it's quite fun to see all the work behind those pictures. But it was basically half our studio involved and our photographer and his team, and SB Seating as well. So around 10 people to take some photos. And this is actually in our old school back in Småland, which is in the dark forest of Sweden. So I hope I give you some new ideas maybe on why we should work with design. So if you can bring something, I would be very happy. Thank you so much for listening.